Welcome back for part 2 of the Cold Steel 3 and 4 community ranking. Now that we've wiped away some of the Gnosis infused sludge, we're starting to dilute that pool of filth to find those specks of cleanliness. Let's jump back in at number 29. We're starting off fairly strong. I'd like to believe that many fans of the series at the very least don't mind Alfin, but the problem with her in Cold Steel 3 and 4 is pretty much summed up here. She really peaked in Cold Steel 2 with her role aboard the Courageous. Felt like a missed opportunity as they could have done so much more with her in relation to Cedric's fall from grace. She had an interesting role in Cold Steel 2, being that voice of the third faction while her brother took a back seat. In Cold Steel 3 and 4, however, the roles reversed. Cedric took a much more story-centric role, arguably far more than Alfin ever did, and his sister was just kind of there. And as the quote mentioned, the only time they really come face to face was during an optional bonding event. Alfin is still a likeable character, but she got left behind in the dust like many others. On to our returning Sky member, and I'll never forget the joy I felt when she first appeared on screen at the start of Cold Steel 3 along with Agate. Tito, without a doubt, was one of the favourites among many during our journeys in LaBelle. Her growth from sensitive crybaby to small protector of the brash was a treat to witness. So trying to follow on from that was already a tough ask. And there's no doubt that she doesn't reach the same heights as she does in Sky. That was inevitable. But my real issue with Tito is that they really pushed the relationship with Agate in these games. I get that Tito has a thing for the redhead and Agate is content with just keeping things as they are lest he incur the wrath of the world's worst mother-in-law, but it was a little too much for my tastes. And that sucks because Tito still had a fair amount to offer in these games as a disciple of Schmidt. Her technical know-how was invaluable in a few instances, and she also acted as the front for one of the more enjoyable side quests in Cold Steel 3, that being the shopping trip in Leaves. I think her spot here is just about right. Honestly, I could never hate this guy, even after what he did to Leanne. It was cowardly and made me want to put him in his place, but I always felt that Rufus was someone who used what he could to achieve his end goal. The villains of Cold Steel honestly have a lot of nuance to them, and I like how Rufus may have done horrible things, but he had principles in the end. A great quote, and one that I agree with. No doubt many people will never forgive Rufus for his shameful display against Leanne, but hey, sometimes you just gotta do what you can to win. For the record, I didn't support his method either. But when we finally come to fight him, we discover a man who is arguably more frail than Cedric. It's a weird case of reverse inferiority, as Rufus is a man who was given everything, who excelled at whatever he did. But he always felt that the reason for that was because of his privileged position. He didn't have that feeling of true accomplishment. His success was preordained. So it's interesting to see his jealousy for Usus, his younger brother who is treated appallingly by his father and the nobility alike. But despite that disadvantage, Usus went on to make true friends. He contributed in breaking the barriers that enveloped Erebonia for so long. And watching that, Rufus felt inferior. How could his brother achieve all of this after all of the hardship he had experienced? Why does he have a group of close comrades who he can rely on, while Rufus has been left all alone? It's a very interesting take on a villain, and definitely not the only one Falcom have concocted. Kind of felt like he was another Walter until the final fight in Cold Steel 4. Then my opinion and interest in him did a 180. The lore bombs he dropped left my jaw on the floor. This one surprised me, because I did not expect McBurn to end up so low. Like my man before me, I did a complete double take on McBurn come that final fight. Like Campanella, he is now one of the fronts of the bigger mysteries of Trails, such as the Great Beyond, the source of phenomena that can't be explained through rational means and are simply put down to the goddess. I feel that this moment was a turning point in the narrative of Trails. Is this a precursor for a more supernatural plot going forward? What did McBurn remember? Why does he now harbour animosity towards the Grand Master? So many questions that I now want to see the answers to, and that's what Falcom are so good at, closing out plot points but reopening several more to keep the player engaged. Cold Steel 4 was a blessing for McBurn. We've seen the return of Tito, now we move on to one of the SSS's finest in Randy. Like Tito, Randy's story was mostly complete come the end of Asia, but he never lost that charm and charisma that we were so familiar with back in the Crossbell games. As an instructor, he took his role seriously, surprisingly seriously considering his demeanour while on duty with the SSS in several instances, but there were sprinkles of those moments that made us enjoy Randy in the Crossbell games. He never lost that infectious personality. If I had to choose a moment though that stands out to me for Randy, it's when 4's branch campus makes their way to Crossbell. It must have been tearing the man apart knowing that his hands were effectively tied. He couldn't help his friends in their predicament, and he implores Reen, the man who was instrumental in the annexation of Crossbell, to fight on his behalf. It's not only a sign of desperation, but also a representation of what Crossbell means to Randy. Of course, he never grew up in the state, but it became a home to him during his time with the SSS, and now he wants to make sure it remains safe, even if he can't do it directly. It's a nice case of continuity for his character, and relatable at that. On to the cat, or cat girl. Celine is an interesting character, but I can't deny that one of you guys made a great quote that I just had to include here. Check this out. Celine was created on purpose to take away part of the spotlight from Emma and prevent her from becoming the closest character to Reen. By including Celine, they cut down on Emma's screen time so they could give every other girl in Reen's harem a chance. And it's true, really. If Celine was substituted for Emma in those cases, you know, as a witch should be doing with an Awakener, we would have had our canon romance right there. Celine was created to contribute to the bonding events. Jokes aside though, Celine is fine. She's a tsundere feline who could now turn into a human every now and then. Not much more to say, to be honest. Like most of old Class 7, her relevance and arc are sent to the back, but she might have suffered from this more than any of her other classmates, and it pains me to say that. Moreover, her closure wasn't nearly as satisfying as the others. It felt like it just happened, but without much payoff compared to the other members. Oof, I can hear the anger of Laura stans from every direction, but I agree 100% with this take. Laura was a fan favourite in Cold Steel 1 and 2, and it was great to see her returning. But my god, she really got it rough in these games. Remember in part 1 when I said Victor's death would have been perfect for Laura's character? Well, I'm reiterating it now because she pretty much got nothing else. She's a wandering swordsman who teaches schools about the Arcade style, she's consistently looking to test the limits, which is a role that was taken by another character in these games, and as a result it just kind of muddies the water with Laura's story. I don't see a clear motivation or end goal for her character. I honestly can't even remember half of the scene she was in because she just never stood out to me. A shame really, because I am still a fan of Laura, but I think her best days are now behind her. If there was one thing that became a little clearer to me from part 1, it's that a few people don't like Milliam. I don't understand the hate personally, I think she's fine. And I'm definitely not the only one. I've always liked Milliam, but seeing her dynamic with Usus and the role she plays of Altina becoming more human warmed my heart. Such a good character. I honestly think Milliam had a strong role in both of these games. Her dynamic with her sister, her relationship with Usus, which was always great to see, assimilating into the Originator Zero by sacrificing her own life. She was decent in these games, and yeah, she is a bit hyper here and there, but that's just part of her appeal, the yin to Altina's yang. Her position at 22 makes sense to me, and if I'm honest, I'd even have her a little bit higher. She's small, but she makes up for that with a big heart. There's not really much to say about Tora. She's the same dependable senpai to Reen and Koa she was before, but now she's an instructor, a very reliable one at that. She had some cool moments in game, in particular that bonding event where she shares her past with Reen, but I will confess I didn't see too many of these. I was more interested in other characters, to be honest. That doesn't take away from Tora though, she's still great. Now here's a good one. Sharon's an intriguing character, mostly because we find out a lot more about her backstory in Cold Steel 3 and 4, in particular her involvement with the former group of assassins the Moonlight Horse. We also find out why she ended up serving the Reinfords and why she eventually moved back to her enforcer duties come the end of Cold Steel 3, the reason being the seeming return of Franz Reinford. It's clear that Sharon harbours great respect and love for the Reinfords who took her in, especially Elise. And it's even more apparent that when her allegiances shift, she is conflicted in her actions. So it comes as a relief when she is absolved of this duty by Irena Reinford herself, as by her deduction, her husband had not returned from the dead. What I really like though is her continued relationship with Anton, one of the best side characters in Trails to date. That moment in Mishalam is perfect to me, as it not only shows the change in mindset of Anton himself, a guy who has been hapless up till this point, but also makes clear the insecurity and interpersonal conflict of Sharon herself. It was a moment of closure that she really needed, and it's no surprise to me that she's made it into the top 20. Now, unlike Thomas, I think Roselia is a side character done well. She's integral to the plot, just like Thomas, but she has just enough time to show us what she's all about. Even with that, she never takes the spotlight away from the main cast. Except for that time where she transforms into a holy beast. That was pretty eye-catching. Other than that though, she's definitely not what I would have expected an ancient clan leader to act like. She's shrouded in mystery in those first 3 chapters of Cold Steel 3 when she freezes time for some reenaction, before she then starts to reveal the backstory of the Hexen clan and the gnomes on those final moments. She's also got a fantastic relationship with some key members like Emma, Vita and Aryan Road, and I think she bounces off them well. She can be serious when she needs to be, bitter in the case of Vita, and also a bit of a crybaby when around Emma. For what she is and what she offers, I think Roselia is decent overall. I get why people don't like her, but in my opinion she's a well-developed character. After seeing what her mother was working on that could harm a lot of people, it was quite understandable why she's so upset. So Elise, I think she gets a good run in Cold Steel 3 or 4, at least in comparison to Laura. In the previous game she resolved to find a new path for the Reinford company, and these games she's very much at the forefront of the happenings within the business. But with that exposure comes a myriad of new challenges for her character, like the fact her mother is so involved with the Imperial government, and the seeming return of her father, though not as she remembers him. I can appreciate what Falcon were doing with Elise's character in the second half of Cold Steel, I just wish there was a bit more time to establish that bond with her father so it could have a bit more impact. High scores across the board except for character development. She didn't really change, and she didn't need to. She debuted as a badass and she remained the same badass till the end of the arc. I pretty much agree with all of this. For me personally, I will always place character development at the top of what I consider to be a great character. I love watching how a character grows over the course of a game, and I'll never change that mindset. But I will admit that some characters start off very strong, meaning that the emphasis is never really on their development. Aurelia is one such character. Straight away from the onset of Cold Steel 3, you know what Aurelia is all about. She's fully aware of the role of the branch campus and why she, along with many other problem Erebonians, have been placed there. She makes that very clear to all present in the inauguration. And that attitude pretty much follows her throughout both games. She's all about finding the next big challenge, testing her martial prowess, and she's got the confidence to boot. No doubt a born leader, and very enjoyable to watch. From one bombshell to another. Cold Steel 3 and 4 do a good job following on with Vita's arc. It makes you realise that she's a more compassionate Anguis akin to Aryan Road rather than Weissman or Novartis. Throughout Cold Steel 3, we see her attempting to stem the flow of the stimulated Septian veins, which are a precursor to the Great Twilight's eventual release, and we also learn that she chose to oppose Ouroboros when they decided to work with Osborne. Vita was attempting to avoid the inevitable end. She wanted to create a pseudo-rivalry between the Ashen and Azure Knights, knowing full well what the actual rivalries would bring about if it came to fruition. And though she failed, she played an important role in attempting to remove the curse when it eventually manifested. Plus, this was also mentioned by my pals on the Kiseki cast, but how about that interesting conversation between Crow and Vita before the first rivalry? Probably reading a bit too much into that, but hey, Crow's on to a potential winner here. Usus is the most consistent character in the Cold Steel arc, with each game keeping him relevant to the plot and giving him plenty of moments to shine. His noble demeanour provides an excellent foil to the greedy side of Erebonia's nobility, and seeing him develop into someone who confides and relies on his friends rather than tackling everything on his own is a treat to watch. I think this quote is bang on. I don't recall ever looking back at Usus and wishing he had more, and as said there, he's now all about working with the rest of Class 7 rather than taking on the responsibility by himself as he attempted to do in Cold Steel 2. He still maintains that air of nobility, but he is a clear representation, like Marcius, of the barriers that the class managed to dissolve during their time together. I personally enjoy his relationship with Million considering their initial rocky start, and he lends well to the development of Rufus as well, a solid member of OG Class 7. Okay, on to Sarah. Now, if I'm being honest, I was very surprised when I saw her final ranking. Though I thought she was still a decent character, and in my eyes she still has the best outward design, I felt that she leaned more towards the Laura spectrum, where she lost a lot of significance in the grand scheme of everything. Don't get me wrong, she gets that moment with the Northern Jaegers in Chapter 3, plus we learn a bit more about her background before she became a Bracer, but I struggle to remember much more about her. She's still a good character overall, but top 15? I must admit that does strike me as odd. Ho ho ho, time to ruffle some feathers. Let's set the mood first. I do enjoy her character development and she's a great mage. However, I wish they had toned down the flirting with Reen. It got old really quickly. I'm gonna be completely upfront with you on this one. Muse is my least favourite member of the new Class 7 by a long shot. If you've noticed something about me in previous rankings, you'll know that I don't like overtuning of a single character trait. Shirley, Walter, Angelica, Wald, all of them have just a smidgen too much of one element in the mix. Muse is no different, and again, if you take that aspect away or at least tone it down, you have a good character underneath that. But the flirting can go rot in Gehenna. There's just way too much of it for my liking. It seems like every other line of dialogue is dedicated to her thirst for the ashen chorizo. And during my first playthrough of Cold Steel 3, it got to the point where I audibly wished for Muse to stop. That doesn't happen often, and from there she had pretty much lost me. I understand why people like her, but I am not a fan. Now, unlike Muse, here's a character I can get behind. We'll bring one of you guys in first. Yuna is the capable leader of New Class 7 and is a great contrast to Reen in this position. While Reen is calm and more collected, Yuna is more emotional and upfront. Her growth during the story is also clearly shown with moments of arrogance and weakness, but also moments of power and encouragement. As such, Yuna is one of the strongest characters story-wise, and she did a great job representing Reen in the first act of Cold Steel 4. As far as I'm concerned, Yuna is the best equipped to be the leader of New Class 7. She's got that fire about her, passionate, down to earth, everything that comes as a positive to me personally, and I love witnessing her grow from Patriot of Crossbell to a person who wishes for peace in not only her homeland but Erebonia as well. But my favourite scene for Yuna will always be that moment near the start of Cold Steel 4. I realise this scene causes a bit of controversy because some people believe that Yuna didn't deserve this moment as she couldn't possibly fathom the loss that OG Class 7 had experienced, the fact that Milliam had died. Of course, New Class 7 barely even knew her outside of the odd encounter, and as a result, Yuna's speech came off as brash and unsympathetic. But I ask the question here, who else was going to do it? Let's not forget, at this point in the story, there is still the chance that Reen is alive. By all means, have a brief moment of remembrance, but this is no time to be wallowing in self-pity. When time is of the essence and the world is literally on the precipice of doom, the last thing you should be doing is feeling sorry for yourself. Get off your asses and rescue your friend. Yuna never had to deserve her speech, she was simply the only one who could do it. The other members of New Class 7 aren't exactly leader material, and OG Class 7 were in a state of depression. It's a great scene that lifts everyone's spirits when they desperately needed it, and I will always defend it for that reason. Rounding out part 2 is one of my personal favourite characters in all of Trails. It's Dorbz. And it's clear I'm not the only one who likes her showing in Cold Steel 3 and 4. No complaints here. One of the best characters in Cold Steel. One moment she's extremely serious, then the next she acts like she's 5 years old. It's lots of fun. Add on a character arc that has more depth than about half of original Class 7, and you've got a winner. In part 1 of this ranking, I said there was a character who was very similar to Claire in terms of background. The real difference is that one chose to serve and another chose to rebel. That character is Doverly. Now, I said that the reason I like Doverly more is because of preference. I'm way more receptive to the characters who actually act upon their own ideals. Doverly idolizes Aryan Road, there is no questioning of this. But despite that, she realizes that something isn't right. This is not the Lance Maiden she chose to follow. And instead of blindly trusting, she makes the bold decision to find her own answers, to move away from the path of certain destruction that she believes her master is supporting. She has moments of doubt and self-reflection in Cold Steel 3, but she makes a decision come Cold Steel 4. And more importantly, she doesn't feel sorry for herself after making that decision. She doesn't cry about the choices she makes. That shows responsibility and conviction. Doverly has her own moral code and she will follow it to the end, even if it means opposing the one she respects the most. Awesome character and will likely remain one of my favourites for the foreseeable future. And there it is guys, part 2 of the Cold Steel 3 and 4 community ranking is complete. Please give it a like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't, it really does help me out. I'll see you for the top 10 next week.